The evening rain fell softly against the tall glass windows of the Golden Oak restaurant, one of the most expensive dining places in the entire city of Chicago. Inside, the warm golden lights created a cozy atmosphere where wealthy people enjoyed their meals. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, and the sound of soft jazz music filled the air. Every table was covered with white silk cloth, and silver cutlery sparkled under the lights. This was a place where a single meal could cost more than what most people earned in a week among the staff working that busy. Friday night was a young woman named Elena Martinez. She was 26 years old, with dark brown hair that she always tied back in a neat ponytail. Her eyes were tired but kind, and she moved quickly between tables, carrying heavy trays of food and expensive wine bottles. Elena had been working at the Golden Oak for almost 2 years now, and she knew every corner of this restaurant like the back of her hand. But what nobody in that restaurant knew was that Elena carried a secret that she had buried deep inside her heart for many years. A secret that connected to the beautiful grand piano that stood in the corner of the restaurant. Every night she would glance at that piano while cleaning tables, and something inside her would stir. Memories would flash through her mind like old photographs, and she would quickly look away, forcing herself to focus on her work. Elena's life had not always been about serving food to rich people. There was a time, many years ago, when she had dreams bigger than the sky itself. She grew up in a small town in Texas, where her mother worked as a cleaning lady and her father drove trucks for a living. Money was always tight in their household, but there was one thing that made Elena's childhood special. In their small wooden house, there was an old piano that her grandmother had left behind before she passed away, from the age of 5. Elena found herself drawn to that piano like a magnet. She would sit on the old wooden bench and press the keys, creating sounds that made her heart feel full. Her mother noticed this love and somehow managed to save enough money to pay for basic piano lessons from an elderly teacher in their neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson was her name, and she was a retired music teacher who charged very little because she saw something special in young Elena. By the time Elena was 12 years old, she could play pieces that most adults struggled with. Her fingers danced across the keys as if they had a mind of their own. Mrs. Patterson told her mother that Elena had a gift, a rare natural talent that came along once in a generation. The old teacher had tears in her eyes when she said those words. She believed that Elena could become a world-famous pianist someday, performing in grand concert halls across the globe, and for a while it seemed like that dream might actually come true. When Elena was 15, she won a statewide piano competition. The prize was a full scholarship to a prestigious music academy in New York City. Elena cried with joy when she received the news, and her parents held her tight, proud beyond words. It felt like all their struggles had finally led to something beautiful. Their daughter was going to become a star, but life has a cruel way of changing direction when you least expect it. Just 3 months before Elena was supposed to leave for New York, tragedy struck her family. Her father was involved in a terrible accident on the highway. His truck collided with another vehicle during a heavy storm, and he suffered severe injuries to his spine. He survived, but the doctor said he would never walk again. He would need constant care and expensive medical treatment for the rest of his life. The medical bills started piling up like mountains. Elena's mother had to quit her cleaning jobs to take care of her husband at home. There was no money coming in, and the bills kept growing bigger and bigger. Elena watched her parents struggle, watched her mother cry at night when she thought no one was listening, and she made a decision that broke her own heart into a million pieces. She gave up her scholarship. She gave up her dreams. She told herself that family came first, that she could not go to New York and chase her dreams while her parents suffered. She was just a teenager, but she took on the responsibility of an adult. She found small jobs, worked long hours, and sent every penny she could back home to help with the medical bills. The years passed by quickly after that. Elena moved from one city to another, always working, always struggling. She worked as a cashier, a cleaner, a delivery person, and finally as a waitress. The piano became a distant memory, something she tried not to think about because it hurt too much. Whenever she heard piano music playing somewhere, She would feel a sharp pain in her chest, like someone was squeezing her heart. Now, at 26, Elena had accepted that her dreams were dead. She told herself that some people were meant to shine and others were meant to survive. She was a survivor, and that was enough. Or at least that is what she tried to believe every single day. That Friday night at the Golden Oak was supposed to be just another ordinary shift. Elena had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She had no idea that among the wealthy customers dining that evening, there was one man whose presence would unlock the door to her buried past. His name was Richard Thornton, and he was one of the most successful businessmen in the entire country. At 58 years old, he had built an empire that included hotels, real estate, and several entertainment companies. His net worth was estimated at over $2 billion, and his face regularly appeared on the covers of business magazines. But despite all his wealth and success, Richard Thornton was not a happy man. He sat alone at a corner table, staring at the menu without really reading it. His expensive suit looked perfect, his silver hair was neatly combed, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a man carrying a heavy burden, a man who had everything money could buy but had lost something that no amount of wealth could bring back. Richard had come to the Golden Oak not for the food, but to escape the emptiness of his large mansion. 3 years ago, he had lost his wife Margaret to cancer. She had been the love of his life, his best friend, his everything. Since her death, Richard had been walking through life like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling nothing inside. Margaret had loved music, especially piano music. She used to play the piano every evening in their home, and Richard would sit nearby, listening to her with a smile on his face. After she passed away, he could not bear to hear piano music anymore. It reminded him too much of what he had lost. He had even covered the piano in their mansion with a white sheet, unable to look at it, but tonight something was different. Tonight, Richard felt a strange pull in his heart, as if something important was about to happen. He did not understand this feeling, but he had learned over his many years in business to trust his instincts. So he sat at his table, waiting for something he could not name, and that something was about to walk right up to his table, carrying a notepad and a tired smile, completely unaware that the next few hours would change both their lives forever. Elena approached the corner table with her notepad ready, not knowing that the man sitting there was worth billions. To her, he was just another customer, another rich person who would probably order expensive wine and barely touch the food. She had seen hundreds of such people over the years, and they all blended together in her memory. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Golden Oak. My name is Elena, and I will be your server tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" She spoke in a polite, practiced tone that she had perfected over countless shifts. Richard looked up from his menu, and for a moment their eyes met. There was something about this young waitress that caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she stood, with her shoulders slightly bent as if carrying an invisible weight. Perhaps it was the tiredness in her eyes that reminded him of people who had fought hard battles in life. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something he could not explain. "Just water for now, please," he said quietly. His voice was deep but gentle, not harsh like many wealthy customers who treated the staff like invisible servants. Elena nodded and walked away to get his water. Richard watched her go, his mind still puzzling over the strange feeling that had gripped him since he entered the restaurant. He shook his head slightly, telling himself he was being foolish. He was just a lonely old man looking for meaning in ordinary moments. When Elena returned with his water, Richard ordered a simple steak with vegetables. She wrote down his order and was about to leave when something caught Richard's eye. On Elena's left wrist, there was a small tattoo. It was a treble clef, the musical symbol that appears at the beginning of sheet music. Most people would not have noticed such a tiny detail. But Richard noticed it immediately because Margaret used to draw that same symbol on her notebooks. "That is an interesting tattoo," Richard said suddenly, pointing at her wrist. "Are you a musician?" Elena instinctively pulled her sleeve down to cover the tattoo. She had gotten it when she was 17, during a brief moment of rebellion and hope. Now it served only as a painful reminder of dreams that never came true. "Oh, this." "No, not really. I used to play a little when I was younger, but that was a long time ago. I should go put in your order, sir? She smiled nervously and hurried away before he could ask any more questions. Richard watched her disappear into the kitchen, and his curiosity grew stronger. There was something in the way she reacted, something that spoke of a hidden story. He had built his business empire by reading people, by understanding their body language and unspoken words. And right now, his instincts were telling him that this young waitress was hiding something significant. The restaurant was getting busier as the evening progressed. More customers arrived, filling up the tables and keeping the staff running from one end to the other. Elena was handling 3 other tables besides Richard's, and she was constantly moving, taking orders, delivering food, and cleaning up after guests who left despite her busy schedule. Elena could not shake off the feeling that the man at the corner table was watching her. Every time she passed by, she felt his eyes following her movements. It was not a creepy stare like some customers gave her. It was more like the gaze of someone trying to solve a puzzle at around 9 o'clock. The regular pianist for the restaurant called in sick. Mr. Johnson, the restaurant manager, was in a panic. Friday nights were important for business, and the live piano music was one of the main attractions that brought in wealthy customers. Without the pianist, the elegant atmosphere of the Golden Oak would feel incomplete. "Does anyone know how to play the piano?" Mr. Johnson asked the staff desperately. "Anyone at all? Even just a few simple tunes?" The other waiters and waitresses shook their heads. One of the cooks mentioned that he had played guitar in high school, but that was not helpful. Mr. Johnson groaned and rubbed his temples. Thinking about how to handle the situation, Elena heard the conversation from across the room, and her heart started beating faster. She looked at the grand piano sitting silently in the corner, and memories came flooding back. Her fingers tingled with a familiar feeling, a longing that she had suppressed for so many years. For one wild moment she thought about volunteering. But then fear took over and she pushed the thought away. Those days were behind her. She was just a waitress now, nothing more. Richard had also heard the manager's distress. He had been watching the scene unfold with interest, and an idea began forming in his mind. He remembered the treble clef tattoo on Elena's wrist, remembered the way she had avoided his questions about music. A businessman's instinct told him that she was the answer to the manager's problem. When Elena came to deliver his steak, Richard decided to take a chance. "I could not help but overhear that you need a pianist tonight," he said casually, cutting into his steak. "Yes, sir. Unfortunately, our regular musician is unwell. I apologize if the lack of music affects your dining experience." Elena's voice was professional, but her eyes flickered briefly toward the piano. Richard noticed that flicker. He set down his knife and fork and looked directly at her. I have been in business for over 30 years. I have met thousands of people, and I have learned to spot talent even when people try to hide it. Something tells me that you can play that piano." Elena's face went pale. "Sir, I really do not know what you mean. I am just a waitress here." "That tattoo on your wrist says otherwise," Richard replied gently. "I am not trying to pressure you or make you uncomfortable, but I have a feeling that there is more to your story than you let people see. And sometimes the things we hide are the very things that can set us free." His words hit Elena like a wave. She stood frozen beside his table, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Who was this man? How could a complete stranger see through her so easily? She felt exposed, as if he had opened a door that she had kept locked for years. "Even if I could play, which I am not saying I can, it has been almost 10 years since I touched a piano properly. I would probably embarrass myself and ruin the evening for everyone." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. Richard smiled, and for the first time that evening, his eyes showed warmth. "I've learned that true talent does not disappear just because we stop using it. It waits patiently inside us, ready to come back when we need it. And maybe tonight is the night you need it." Before Elena could respond, Mr. Johnson approached their table looking stressed. "Elena, is everything okay here? Is the gentleman satisfied with his meal?" Richard seized the moment. "Actually, I was just telling your lovely waitress here that I believe she might be able to help with your pianist problem." Mr. Johnson looked confused. Elena, you play the piano? You never mentioned anything like that in your 2 years here. Elena wanted the ground to open up and swallow her. She felt trapped between the expectant looks of her manager and the encouraging gaze of the mysterious businessman. I used to play a very long time ago, but I am not a professional. I cannot perform in front of all these people. It's just one song, Richard said softly. One song to help out your manager and the restaurant. If it does not work out, no harm done. But something tells me that once you sit at that piano, magic is going to happen. Mr. Johnson's eyes lit up with hope. Elena, please, just try. Even one song would be better than nothing. I will give you the rest of the night off after that, and I will pay you overtime. The other customers in the restaurant had started to notice the commotion. Some were looking at their phones impatiently, while others watched with curiosity. The pressure was building, and Elena felt like she could barely breathe. Then she looked at the piano again. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway grand piano with a polished black surface that reflected the chandelier lights. It looked lonely sitting there, waiting for someone to bring it to life. And somewhere deep inside Elena's heart, past all the pain and disappointment, a small flame began to flicker. Maybe it was time to stop running from her past. Maybe it was time to face the music, literally. Okay, she whispered, surprising even herself. One song. Just one song. The walk from Richard's table to the piano felt like the longest journey of Elena's life. It was only about 30 feet, but each step felt heavier than the one before. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. Her hands were shaking, and sweat was forming on her palms. What had she agreed to? What was she thinking? The restaurant had grown strangely quiet. Conversations at other tables had stopped as people noticed the waitress in the black uniform walking toward the grand piano. Some customers looked confused, wondering what was happening. Others seemed annoyed, impatient for their evening entertainment. A few pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever was about to happen. Elena reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, just staring at the keys. They looked exactly like she remembered, white and black, waiting patiently for her touch. She thought about the old piano in her childhood home, about Mrs. Patterson's gentle voice guiding her through difficult pieces, about the dreams she had once held so close to her heart. You can do this, she whispered to herself. It is just one song. Just one song, and then you can go back to your normal life. She sat down on the piano bench, adjusting its height out of habit. The smooth wood felt familiar under her fingers. She placed her foot on the sustain pedal and felt a rush of memories wash over her. For a moment she was 15 again, sitting at the competition piano, feeling nervous but excited. For a moment all the hard years melted away, and she was just a girl who loved music more than anything in the world. Richard watched from his table, holding his breath. He did not know why this moment felt so important to him, but it did. Maybe it was because he saw himself in this young woman, saw the pain of lost dreams and unfulfilled potential. Or maybe it was because Margaret would have wanted him to help someone like Elena, someone whose music was trapped inside them, waiting to break free. Mr. Johnson stood near the kitchen door, his fingers crossed tightly. The other staff members had stopped working, their eyes fixed on Elena. Even the cooks had come out to watch through the small window that connected the kitchen to the dining area. Everyone was waiting. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She let her mind go blank, pushing away all the fear and doubt. Then, almost automatically, her hands found their position on the keys. She did not think about what song to play. She simply let her heart decide. The first notes filled the air like gentle raindrops falling on a quiet pond. She had chosen Clair de Lune by Debussy, one of the most beautiful and emotional pieces in classical piano music. It was also the first piece Mrs. Patterson had taught her all those years ago, the piece that had made her fall in love with the piano. At first, her fingers felt stiff and uncertain. There were small mistakes, tiny hesitations that only a trained ear would notice. But as she continued playing, something magical began to happen. Her muscles remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Years of practice, hours upon hours of dedication, came flooding back like a river breaking through a dam. The music grew stronger, more confident. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with increasing grace, finding notes she had not played in a decade. The beautiful melody wrapped around the restaurant like a warm blanket, touching every corner of the room. The chandeliers seemed to sparkle brighter, and even the rain against the windows seemed to fall in rhythm with the music. One by one, the customers stopped everything they were doing. Forks were set down mid-bite. Wine glasses were placed gently on tables. Phones were lowered as people forgot about recording and simply listened. The music was that captivating, that powerful. It was not just technically perfect. It carried something deeper, something that spoke of pain and loss and hope and beauty all mixed together. A woman at one of the tables felt tears forming in her eyes without understanding why. A businessman who had come for a stressful dinner meeting found himself relaxing for the first time in months. An elderly couple held hands across their table, remembering their youth and the dances they had shared so many years ago. The music was doing something to everyone in that room, breaking down walls and touching hearts in ways that words never could. Richard felt a lump forming in his throat. The piece Elena was playing had been one of Margaret's favorites. He could almost see his late wife sitting at their home piano, her graceful fingers creating the same beautiful sounds. For the first time in 3 years, the memory did not bring only pain. It brought a strange kind of peace, as if Margaret was somehow present in this moment, smiling down at him. Mr. Johnson's mouth had fallen open in disbelief. In 2 years of working together, he had never suspected that his quiet, hard-working waitress possessed such an incredible gift. He felt foolish for never asking about her life outside of work, for never taking the time to really know her. Elena herself was lost in the music. She had forgotten about the restaurant, the customers, the fear that had gripped her just minutes ago. She was somewhere else entirely, in a world where only the music existed. Every note she played released something inside her, a flood of emotions that she had kept bottled up for far too long. The piece built toward its most powerful section, and Elena's playing became even more passionate. Her body swayed slightly with the music, and her face showed the depth of feeling that the notes could not fully express. This was not just a performance. This was a confession, a prayer, a cry from the deepest part of her soul. When the final notes faded into silence, nobody moved. The restaurant remained completely still for what felt like an eternity. Elena sat frozen at the piano, suddenly aware of where she was and what she had just done. Fear crept back into her heart. Had she made a terrible mistake? Had she embarrassed herself in front of all these wealthy, sophisticated people? Then, from somewhere in the back of the restaurant, someone began to clap. It was slow at first, a single pair of hands breaking the silence. Then another person joined in, and another, and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. People rose from their seats, giving Elena a standing ovation. Cheers and shouts of appreciation filled the air. Mixing with the continued clapping, Elena turned around on the piano bench, her eyes wide with shock. She could not believe what was happening. These wealthy, important people were standing and clapping for her, a simple waitress who had just played a song she had not touched in 10 years. Tears began streaming down her face, and she did not try to stop them. Richard was on his feet as well, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. His eyes were wet, but he did not care. He had been right about her. He had sensed something special, and now the whole restaurant had witnessed it. This young woman had a gift that could not be taught, a connection to music that was rare and precious. Mr. Johnson rushed over to Elena, his face a mixture of shock and joy. That was incredible. Absolutely incredible. Why did you never tell me you could play like that? We have been paying professional pianists when we had someone like you on staff all along. Elena could not find words to respond. She was overwhelmed by the reaction, by the emotions that the performance had stirred inside her. She just sat there, tears flowing freely, as the applause continued to wash over her like waves on a shore. But the night was far from over. Richard Thornton had seen something in those few minutes that had changed his perspective entirely. He had a decision to make, and it was going to alter the course of both their lives forever. The applause eventually died down, and slowly the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. Customers went back to their meals, conversations resumed, and the staff continued with their duties. But nothing was really the same. An invisible thread had been woven through everyone present, connecting them through the experience they had just shared. Elena walked back toward the kitchen on shaky legs, wiping the tears from her face. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if she had stripped herself bare in front of strangers. Part of her wanted to run out of the restaurant and never come back. But another part, a part she had forgotten existed, felt alive for the first time in years. Several customers stopped her on the way, complimenting her performance and asking about her background. She answered politely but briefly, not ready to share her story with strangers. All she wanted was to find a quiet corner and process what had just happened, before she could reach the kitchen. She felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned around to find Richard Thornton standing behind her, his expensive suit slightly wrinkled from standing and applauding. "That was the most beautiful piano playing I have heard in years," he said softly. "And trust me, I have attended concerts at Carnegie Hall and the Sydney Opera House. What you did tonight was special." Elena looked down at the floor, uncomfortable with the praise. "Thank you, sir. But it was just one song. I got lucky that my fingers remembered what to do." Richard shook his head firmly. "No, that was not luck. That was talent, pure and extraordinary talent. May I ask you something personal?" Elena hesitated but nodded. Something about this man made her want to trust him, even though she barely knew him. What happened? Why is someone with your ability working as a waitress instead of performing on stages around the world? The question hit Elena like a punch to the stomach. She looked into Richard's eyes and saw genuine curiosity and compassion. He was not asking to judge her or pity her. He simply wanted to understand. "It is a long story," she said quietly, "and not a very happy one." "I have time," Richard replied, "and I have been told that I am a good listener. Would you join me at my table for a few minutes? I promise this is not anything inappropriate. I am just an old man who wants to hear your story." Mr. Johnson appeared beside them, still buzzing with excitement. "Elena, take all the time you need. I will have someone else cover your tables. Mr. Thornton is one of our most valued guests, and you have earned a break after that performance." Elena wanted to refuse, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the kindness in Richard's eyes, or maybe it was the fact that she had never really told her story to anyone. Whatever the reason, she found herself nodding and following him back to his corner table. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. Richard waited patiently, giving Elena the space she needed to gather her thoughts. Finally, she began to talk, and once she started, the words flowed out like water from a broken dam. She told him about her childhood in Texas, about the old piano in her small house, about Mrs. Patterson and her gentle teaching methods. She told him about the competition she had won and the scholarship to New York that had seemed like a ticket to her dreams. Her voice cracked when she described her father's accident, the mounting medical bills, the impossible choice she had to make. Richard listened without interrupting, his face showing only understanding and empathy. He had met many people in his life, but there was something about Elena's story that touched him deeply. She was not bitter or angry about the hand life had dealt her. She was simply sad, mourning a version of herself that had never had the chance to exist. "After I gave up the scholarship, I tried to keep playing," Elena continued. "I would find pianos wherever I could, in churches, in schools, and music stores. But eventually, it became too painful. Every time I played, I was reminded of everything I had lost. So I stopped. I told myself it was for the best, that I needed to focus on practical things, on surviving. And your parents? How are they now?" Richard asked gently. A shadow passed over Elena's face. "My father passed away 4 years ago. His body just gave up after years of complications. My mother is still in Texas, living with my aunt. She has some health issues too, and I send her most of what I earn. That is why I work double shifts whenever I can." Richard sat back in his chair, processing everything he had heard. His heart ached for this young woman who had sacrificed so much for her family. He thought about his own daughter, who had been given every opportunity in life and still complained about minor inconveniences. Elena had faced true hardship with grace and strength. "Can I tell you something about myself?" Richard asked. "It is only fair since you shared your story with me." Elena nodded, curious about this wealthy stranger who seemed so different from the other rich customers she served. Richard took a deep breath before speaking. "I have more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. I own properties all over the world, companies that employ thousands of people, investments that generate wealth while I sleep. By any standard measure, I am one of the most successful men in America." He paused and his voice grew heavier. "But 3 years ago, I lost my wife Margaret to cancer. She was the love of my life, my partner in everything that mattered. We met when I was just starting out, when I had nothing but dreams and determination. She believed in me when no one else did. She was there through every success and every failure." Elena saw the pain in his eyes and felt a connection forming between them. They were both people who had lost something precious, who were carrying invisible wounds that the world could not see. "Margaret loved music," Richard continued. "She played the piano beautifully, almost as beautifully as you played tonight. After she died, I could not bear to hear piano music. It reminded me too much of her, of the evenings she would play while I sat nearby, of the life we had built together. I even covered the piano in our house, unable to look at it." "I am so sorry for your loss," Elena said softly. She understood that kind of pain, the kind that made you want to lock away everything connected to your sorrow. Richard reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "When you played tonight, something changed inside me. For the first time in 3 years, the music did not bring only pain. It brought comfort. It brought memory. It brought my Margaret back to me, just for a few beautiful moments. And I realized that shutting out the music was not protecting me. It was preventing me from healing." Tears formed in Elena's eyes again. She had not expected this conversation, had not expected to find such understanding from a stranger. "I know exactly what you mean," she whispered. "I have been running from the piano for the same reason. It hurts too much to remember who I was supposed to become." Richard squeezed her hand gently. "What if I told you that it is not too late? What if I told you that your story does not have to end here, in this restaurant, serving tables for the rest of your life?" Elena looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" Richard smiled, and for the first time that evening his eyes sparkled with genuine excitement. "I mean that I want to help you. I want to give you the chance that life took away from you all those years ago, and I have the means to do it." Elena stared at Richard, certain she had misheard him. Rich people sometimes said kind things they did not mean, especially after emotional moments. She had learned not to get her hopes up, not to believe in fairy tales. Life had taught her that the only person she could rely on was herself. "Mr. Thornton, that is very kind of you, but I cannot accept charity. I have managed on my own for a long time, and I will continue to do so." Her voice was polite but firm. Richard shook his head. "This is not charity, Elena. I am not offering to give you money and send you on your way. I am offering you an opportunity, one that you will have to work incredibly hard for. But I believe in you, and I believe that your talent deserves a chance to shine." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple and elegant, with just his name and phone number printed in gold lettering. He placed it on the table in front of her. "I own several entertainment venues across the country, including a concert hall in New York City. I also have connections with the best music academies and teachers in the world. What I am proposing is this: I will sponsor your musical education. I will pay for you to study with the finest instructors, give you access to practice facilities, and when you are ready, give you a platform to perform." Elena's hands were trembling. This sounded too good to be true, and things that sounded too good usually were. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." Richard was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "When Margaret was dying, she made me promise something. She said that I had spent my whole life making money, and now it was time to start making a difference. She asked me to use my wealth to help people who deserved a chance but never got one. I have given to charities, built schools, funded hospitals. But tonight, when you played that piano, I felt like Margaret was speaking to me directly. I felt like she was saying that this is the person I should help. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The coincidence was almost too perfect, too meaningful to be random. Was this fate? Was this the universe finally giving her a second chance? Even if I agreed, I am 26 years old. That is too old to become a professional pianist. The great ones start as children and practice their entire lives. I am way behind. She was listing reasons to refuse, but her voice was losing conviction with each word. Richard smiled knowingly. Age is just a number. I started my first successful business at 43 after failing multiple times before that. Some of the greatest achievements in history have come from people who were told they were too old or too late. What matters is not when you start, but how much heart you put into it. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. I saw you play tonight. I saw the way you connected with that piano, the way the music flowed through you like it was part of your soul. That cannot be taught, Elena. That comes from within. With proper training and dedication, you could become one of the great pianists of your generation. I truly believe that. Elena sat in silence, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. This stranger was offering her everything she had ever wanted, everything she had given up so many years ago. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, being asked to jump and trust that she would fly instead of fall. What about my mother? She asked. I cannot stop sending her money. She depends on me. Richard waved his hand dismissively. I will take care of your mother's medical expenses and living costs. That will be part of the arrangement. You should not have to choose between your dream and your family. With my resources, you can have both. Tears were flowing freely down Elena's face now. She did not try to hide them or wipe them away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel hope, real hope, the kind that makes your chest tight and your heart race. I need time to think about this, she said finally. This is too big a decision to make in one night. Richard nodded with understanding. Take all the time you need. My offer will not expire. When you are ready, call the number on that card. And Elena, he paused, making sure she was looking at him, whatever you decide, please do not stop playing the piano. The world needs your music, whether or not you accept my help. He stood up, leaving a generous cash tip on the table that was probably more than Elena earned in a month. Then he walked toward the exit, stopping briefly to pay his bill and compliment Mr. Johnson on the wonderful evening. Elena sat alone at the corner table, holding the business card in her trembling hands. Around her, the restaurant continued its normal operations, but she felt like she was in a different world entirely. She looked at the grand piano across the room, the instrument that had changed her life in the span of one song. That night, after her shift ended, Elena did not go straight home as she usually did. Instead, she walked through the rainy streets of Chicago, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. She passed by closed shops and quiet cafes. Barely noticing where her feet were taking her, she ended up at a small park near her apartment, sitting on a wet bench and staring at the city lights reflected in the puddles. The rain had stopped, but the air was still cool and fresh. She thought about her father, about the sacrifices he had made for their family. She thought about her mother, alone in Texas. Probably worrying about her daughter in the big city, she thought about Mrs. Patterson, her first piano teacher, who had seen something special in a poor little girl from a small town. Mrs. Patterson had passed away a few years ago, but Elena still remembered her words clearly. Music is not just something you do, Elena, it is something you are. Never forget that. For the first time in many years, Elena allowed herself to imagine a different future. She saw herself on a grand stage wearing a beautiful gown, playing for thousands of people. She saw concert halls in Paris, London, Tokyo. She saw herself becoming the person she was always meant to be, but she also saw the risks. What if she failed? What if her skills were too rusty to recover? What if Richard changed his mind or lost interest? What if she gave up her stable, if difficult, life for a dream that might never come true? She stayed in that park until the first light of dawn began to color the sky. By then, she had made her decision. She was terrified, more terrified than she had ever been in her life. But she was also excited, hopeful, and ready to take the biggest leap of faith she had ever taken. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number on Richard's business card. It rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Thornton, this is Alana, the waitress from the restaurant. I know it is early, and I'm sorry to wake you, but I wanted to tell you my answer." There was a pause on the other end, then Richard's voice came through, now fully awake. "I am listening." Elena took a deep breath. "Yes, my answer is yes. I want to play the piano again. I want to become who I was supposed to be." She could almost hear Richard smiling through the phone. "Then let us begin." The months that followed were the most challenging and rewarding of Elena's entire life. True to his word, Richard arranged for her to study with some of the finest piano instructors in the country. She moved from Chicago to New York City, leaving behind her waitressing job and the life of survival she had known for so long. Richard set her up in a comfortable apartment near Central Park, with a beautiful grand piano that she could practice on whenever she wanted. At first, Elena felt guilty about accepting so much. She offered to pay him back someday, to work for his company, to find some way to earn what he was giving her. But Richard refused every offer. "The only payment I want is to see you succeed," he told her. "That will be worth more to me than any amount of money." Her first instructor was a stern Russian woman named Valentina Petrov, a former concert pianist who had performed with the greatest orchestras in the world before retiring to teach. Valentina had no patience for excuses or self-pity. She pushed Elena harder than anyone had ever pushed her before. "Your technique has suffered from neglect," Valentina said during their first lesson, her accent thick and her eyes critical. "But the foundation is there. The natural ability is there. We must rebuild what has crumbled and make it stronger than before." Elena practiced for 8 to 10 hours every day, until her fingers ached and her back was stiff from sitting at the piano. There were moments when she wanted to give up, when the gap between where she was and where she needed to be seemed too wide to cross. But every time she felt like quitting, she remembered her father's face, her mother's sacrifices, and Richard's belief in her. Richard visited her regularly, not to check on his investment, but because they had become genuine friends. They would have dinner together and talk about music, life, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Richard started listening to piano music again, something he had avoided since Margaret's death. Elena's playing had opened a door that he thought was closed forever. "Margaret would have loved you," he told Elena one evening. "She would have been your biggest fan." Elena smiled at the thought. She had seen pictures of Margaret in Richard's office, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She wished she could have met her, could have thanked her for the promise that had led Richard to help her. As the months passed, Elena's skills improved dramatically. The years of neglect were slowly erased, replaced by new strength and confidence. Valentina, who rarely gave compliments, began to nod with approval during their lessons. "You are becoming what you were meant to be," she said one day. "The butterfly is emerging from the cocoon." But the journey was not without setbacks. Elena suffered from terrible stage fright whenever she had to perform in front of others, even small groups. The trauma of giving up her dreams had left deep scars, and the fear of failure haunted her constantly. There were nights when she woke up in a cold sweat, dreaming that she was on a stage and could not remember a single note. Richard hired a sports psychologist who worked with elite athletes to help Elena overcome her anxiety. Together, they developed techniques for managing fear and staying focused under pressure. Elena learned to breathe through her panic, to visualize success instead of failure, to trust in the thousands of hours she had spent preparing after 18 months of intensive training. Valentina declared that Elena was ready for her first public performance. Richard arranged for her to play at a charity gala at his concert hall in Manhattan. It would be a small audience of about 300 people, but it included music critics, industry professionals, and wealthy patrons of the arts. The night of the performance arrived faster than Elena expected. She stood backstage, wearing a stunning blue gown that Richard had bought for her. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a simple diamond necklace that had belonged to Margaret. Richard had given it to her as a good luck charm. "You look beautiful," Richard said, standing beside her. "And you are going to be magnificent." Elena's hands were shaking. "What if I fail? What if I freeze up there and cannot play? What if everyone realizes I am just a fraud, a waitress pretending to be a pianist?" Richard took her hands in his, steadying them. "Listen to me. You are not pretending anything. You are not a fraud. You are Elena Martinez, one of the most talented pianists I have ever heard. I have heard hundreds of musicians over the years, and very few of them have what you have. Now go out there and show the world." The stage manager called her name, and Elena walked toward the spotlight on legs that felt like jelly. The concert hall was beautiful, with red velvet seats and golden decorations. The audience sat in hushed anticipation, programs in their hands, ready to judge this unknown pianist that Richard Thornton was so enthusiastic about. Elena sat at the piano, a magnificent Steinway that seemed to glow under the lights. She looked at the keys, took a deep breath, and placed her hands in position. For a moment, she closed her eyes and remembered everything that had brought her to this point. The old piano in Texas, Mrs. Patterson's gentle encouragement, her father's sacrifice, Richard's belief in her. Then she began to play. The first piece was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most technically demanding works in the piano repertoire. Elena had practiced it thousands of times, and now her fingers moved with absolute precision. The music filled the hall, soaring and diving, whispering and thundering. It was the sound of heartbreak and hope, of struggle and triumph. The audience sat motionless, captivated by what they were hearing. Music critics who had seen every great pianist of the last 50 years leaned forward in their seats, their skepticism melting away. This was not just technical excellence. This was artistry. This was soul. Elena played 3 more pieces, each one better than the last. By the time she finished her final number, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, the audience was on its feet before the last note had even faded. The applause was deafening, a wave of sound that washed over Elena and filled her heart with joy. She stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She looked into the audience and found Richard, standing in the front row, clapping harder than anyone else. His eyes were wet too, and he was smiling the biggest smile she had ever seen. She had done it. After all the years of pain and sacrifice, after all the setbacks and fears, she had finally become who she was meant to be. Elena Martinez, the waitress from the Golden Oak, was now a concert pianist. And this was just the beginning. The years that followed Elena's debut performance were like a beautiful dream that she never wanted to wake up from. Word of her talent spread quickly through the classical music world. Critics called her a revelation, a once-in-a-generation talent who had emerged from nowhere to captivate audiences with her emotional depth and technical brilliance. She performed at Carnegie Hall, the Sydney Opera House, the Royal Albert Hall in London, and dozens of other prestigious venues around the world. She recorded albums that won awards and topped classical music charts. She was featured in magazines, interviewed on television, and celebrated as one of the great comeback stories in musical history. But fame and success never changed who Elena was at her core. She remained humble and grateful, always remembering where she had come from and who had helped her along the way. She visited her mother in Texas regularly, bringing joy to the woman who had sacrificed so much for her family. She established a scholarship fund in her father's name, helping children from poor families pursue their musical dreams. Elena also founded a program called Second Chances, which identified talented adults who had given up their artistic pursuits due to life circumstances. The program provided training, mentorship, and financial support to help them reclaim their passions. Many successful artists emerged from this program, and Elena took personal interest in each of them. Richard Thornton remained her closest friend and biggest supporter. He attended almost every one of her concerts, sitting in the front row with a proud smile on his face. Their friendship had deepened over the years into something profound and beautiful, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, And genuine love. 5 years after Elena's debut performance, something special happened. Richard was diagnosed with heart problems, a reminder that time was passing and life was precious. The doctors said he needed to slow down, to reduce stress and enjoy his remaining years peacefully. Richard decided to host one final gala at his concert hall, a celebration of music, life, and the power of second chances. He invited the most important people in his life, including business partners, old friends, and, of course, Elena. But he had a special request for her. "I want you to play the piece you played that night at the Golden Oak," he said. "Clair de Lune, the piece that changed everything." Elena agreed without hesitation. It would be her honor to play that piece for him, the man who had given her a second life. The night of the gala arrived, and the concert hall was filled with elegantly dressed guests. Flowers decorated every corner, and champagne flowed freely. Richard sat in his usual front row seat, looking older but content. His doctors had warned him against too much excitement, but he insisted on being there. When Elena walked onto the stage, the audience fell silent. She was no longer the nervous waitress who had trembled at a restaurant piano. She was a world-renowned artist, confident and graceful, wearing a stunning silver gown that sparkled under the lights. But as she sat at the piano, she was transported back to that rainy Friday night in Chicago. She remembered the fear, the doubt, the moment she had decided to take a chance. She remembered Richard's encouraging words and the standing ovation that had followed her first performance. She began to play Clair de Lune, and the familiar melody filled the hall. But this time, the music carried even more meaning. It was not just a beautiful piece. It was a tribute to everyone who had believed in her, everyone who had sacrificed for her, everyone who had loved her along the way. As she played, Elena noticed something happening in the audience. People were holding hands, wiping tears, embracing each other. The music was touching their hearts just as it had touched hers all those years ago. It was reminding them of their own dreams, their own second chances, their own possibilities. When the final notes faded, the silence lasted longer than usual. Then slowly the applause began. It grew and grew until the entire hall was thundering with appreciation. Elena stood and bowed, her eyes finding Richard in the front row. He was crying openly, not bothering to hide his tears. His face showed a mixture of joy, gratitude, and peace. This moment, this performance, was everything he had hoped for when he first encouraged a tired waitress to sit at a piano. His promise to Margaret had been fulfilled in ways he never could have imagined. After the concert, there was a reception where guests mingled and congratulated Elena, but she only had eyes for Richard. She found him sitting in a quiet corner, looking out a window at the New York City skyline. "Thank you," she said simply, sitting beside him. Richard smiled and took her hand. "No, thank you. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever. You gave me hope. You gave me music. You gave me a reason to believe that life is beautiful, even when it is painful." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. "I would not be here without you. Everything I am, everything I have achieved, started with you believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Two people from completely different worlds, brought together by tragedy and transformed by music. A waitress who became a world-famous pianist. A grieving billionaire who found healing and purpose. A chance encounter that changed everything. Richard passed away peacefully 18 months later, surrounded by people who loved him. In his will, he left the concert hall to Elena, along with a letter that she would treasure forever. The letter spoke of Margaret, of second chances, of the power of music to heal wounded souls. It ended with words that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. "My dear Elena, you were the answer to a dying woman's wish and an old man's prayer. You proved that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. Keep playing, keep inspiring, keep giving others the chance that I gave you. The world needs your music, and Margaret and I will be listening from wherever we are, proud beyond words of the extraordinary woman you have become." Elena continued to perform for many years after Richard's death. She became one of the most celebrated pianists of her generation. Beloved not just for her technical skill but for the emotion and authenticity she brought to every performance. She never forgot where she came from, never stopped helping others find their own second chances, and every time she sat at a piano, whether in a grand concert hall or a small community center, she thought of that rainy Friday night in Chicago. She thought of the wealthy stranger who saw something special in a tired waitress. She thought of the moment she had decided to stop running from her past and start running toward her future. The story of Elena Martinez and Richard Thornton became legendary in the classical music world. It was told and retold, inspiring countless people to pursue their dreams no matter how impossible they seemed, because sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you, one moment of courage, one song played from the heart, to change everything forever, and that is exactly what happened on a rainy Friday night. When a rich businessman urged a waitress to play the piano, and seconds later, everyone fell silent.